المحاضرة من البداية؟
أيوة.
شكرا.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I think this is going to be a long journey, not a very long journey, but it's going to be long enough. We're going to start with the basics of translation. And then once we're done with the whole 20-hour course, it's going to be the beginning of your journey on your own, because this is only the beginning. I don't want you to expect that after we finish the training, you're going to be expert translators. It doesn't happen like that. The more you work, or like the harder you work, the more time you spend on translation, the more time you spend training, the better you will become. So I don't want you to think that this happens overnight. It's a process, it's a journey, and you're going to understand and realize that translation is not about using an open dictionary and changing the text from one alphabetical system into another. It's more than that, it's deeper than that. It's not harder than that, it's not hard. It's just not a simple process. The process is complicated, but the work is not difficult. So it's complicated, but it's not difficult. And we're going to see that together, inshallah. So let's begin. Now, we're working with language, so we need to understand what language is. Language does not appear out of nowhere. When we speak Arabic or when we speak English, it does not appear out of nothing. It is connected to a person's past, connected to a person's knowledge, connected to a person's culture, connected to a person's family. Sometimes within the same family, each person speaks differently depending on the people who surround him or her. And I'll give you an example. Now, when we go to the university, we meet friends from different areas. We meet people from the north, people from the south, people from the middle area. You meet people from your own area. So I don't want to say that we have diverse cultures. We don't have diverse cultures, but we do have different ways of speaking. A simple word like now, halla, halwa'it, hal'et, halgate, hassa. I'm sure you say one of these words, and I'm sure you know someone else who uses another word. Now, these words all indicate the same thing, but they are said differently by different people. Why do these people speak differently, although they use the alphabets of Arabic and the sounds of Arabic? Because they have been exposed to different families, to different, I don't want to say cultures in the general sense of culture, but family culture, different family culture, different neighborhood culture. So that results in particular choices made by a person in their speech. That's why some people say halla, some say hassa, some say halgate, some say some say abilla, some say imbala. Now, understanding that within the same language, there are different variations, there are different dialects, there are different connections to history, to religion, to literature. It helps us understand the concept of written and spoken texts. It helps us understand that the language we're going to translate from is not just the text. This text is rooted in a bigger world, a bigger universe, a universe of culture, a universe of religion, a universe of connotation, a universe of denotation, and so on and so forth. And in the same sense, the language we're going to translate to, like, say, from Arabic into English or from English into Arabic, we're going to find out that even the English language goes through the same concept, that we have cultures, we have dialects, we have different forms of literature that relate to a particular city, a particular country. And because of all of these elements that affect the language, the translation process, translators sometimes find difficulty in translating from a language into another. They sometimes do not have sufficient language information, linguistic information. Sometimes they do not have sufficient cultural understanding of the language. Sometimes they don't have religious understanding of the language. So how can I be a good translator? This is what we're going to speak about in a bit. But let's start with a simple question. Is there a difference between written and spoken language? In the future, we're going to enjoy a more interactive sessions, but because this is an introductory session, it's going to take the form of lecturing, so forgive me for that. So I'm going to ask the questions and answer them, but inshallah later on, I'll make sure to include you in the session. Now, of course, there are differences, not just one difference. There are differences between written and spoken languages. If we talk about spoken texts, when we speak, we include emotion in our speech. I can use high pitch, low pitch. I can use high intonation, low intonation. I can stress certain words and I can ignore other words and so on. In spoken language, there is room for error. Sometimes you speak because you're tired, because you're concerned about other things, you mispronounce words, you make grammatical mistakes, whether as a native or as a speaker of the language. In spoken language, you assist it with your body language or facial expressions. Sometimes you say something, but the context of your body, how your face looks while saying it, how your hands look while saying it, how your body's posture is when you say it, affect the meaning that you're trying to deliver. Now, these paratextual features or elements are not usually explicit in the written text. Sometimes the only way for you to understand the intonation is if the text itself tells you that the person who said this was angry, or the person who said this was sad, and so on, because the written text does not have a voice, because the written text does not include facial expressions or body language. But why are you saying this? How is this related to translation? Now, when we say translation, we talk about two things. We talk about interpretation, which is related to, like, it is spoken translation, and we have the written translation. And because sometimes we are asked to translate, for example, recordings, sometimes we're asked to translate, to change, to turn a video into a written script with details for research purposes, for example, and so on. So understanding again that the text is not about the words that are found in it. The text goes beyond that. It goes beyond the written. It's not just the words. Sometimes these words have implications. You need to know these implications. How can I know? How can I understand? You need to be a good reader. You need to be a good researcher. You need to have sufficient understanding of the culture, the religion, the world that lies behind the language. That's why knowing grammar is not enough. Knowing grammar makes you accurate. But if you want to be a fluent translator and a fluent user of the language, you need to at least know as much as you can about the other elements of language. Now, what does any language consist of? We start with the first element, which is sounds. Other than sign language, which is used by people who cannot speak, every language has sounds. And in so many texts, sound is an essential part of the meaning. And I'll give you an example. In poetry and literature in general, you would find sometimes that the rhyme, the qafiyah, is part of the meaning, is part of the beauty of the text. There are so many literary devices, such as antinaclasis, which is al-jinas. We have al-jinas al-tam and al-jinas al-naqis. Al-jinas al-tam, when two words look the same, sound the same, but have different meanings, like the word dhahab. Dhahab means dhahaba, dhahab, the verb, and it also means al-dhahab, gold. Now, in my text, in my written text, if the author uses these words with the sounds they have, he or she does it because there is an intention behind it, because they want to deliver a certain meaning through antinaclasis or through these sounds. Now, if I'm going to translate the text, I'm not just going to translate the meaning of dhahaba and the meaning of dhahab, as in gold and went. Because if I just translate the meaning, going and gold, I'm going to lose the feature of antinaclasis. I'm going to lose the literary device that creates beauty in this text. For that reason, I need to revise my understanding of the text, not being just words, but having other paratextual elements and including meanings that are not just at the surface of the text. Now, when sounds are put together, they make words. These words do not appear separately. They appear as part of collocations. Collocation is التلازم اللفظي. And what does that mean? It means I can deliver pizza, I can deliver a speech, but I cannot أوصل خطاب. ممكن إني أوصل pizza, deliver pizza, لكن ما بقدر أوصل خطاب. I can deliver pizza and I can deliver a speech in English, but in Arabic, the word يوصل cannot work with the word خطاب. So when I translate, I need to be aware of the concept of collocations, that every language includes certain words that come together, and I can't use them haphazardly. One of the problems we face with beginner translators is that they put words together, whether into English or in Arabic, and they forget that sometimes these words do not come together. I'll give you an example. Someone translates, for example, it's one of my favorite translation. I don't want to say mistakes, but setbacks. Now, someone would say brainstorming is العصف الذهني. And it is an established equivalent. And by established equivalent, I mean people use it. It's there, it's out there. Now, when you think about Arabic language, the roots of Arabic language, the collocations of Arabic language, there's nothing called عصف ذهني. العاصفة والذهن والعصف الذهني, they don't come together in Arabic. So someone, somewhere, translated it into العصف الذهني and it became an established equivalent. So how can we actually translate brainstorming? I would go with something like تداول الأفكار. It's like you're exchanging ideas, you're thinking about something. Now, after these collocations come together, they create a sentence. اوكي طب حد يحكي بصوت عالي يا جماعة. الآن انتم معايا؟ ما رحش عليكم كتير، يعني كان هذا وهلا هذا، احنا هنا تمام؟ كده كويس؟
تمام يا مس.
تمام. So moving from collocations, we move to the structure. And by structure, we mean that when words come together, the collocations come together, they are part of a longer sentence. Now that sentence has to be grammatically correct. That's why sometimes people who speak English as a foreign language or as a second language, and they are not aware of the grammar of the language, they make structural mistakes. Sadly, native Arabs make structural mistakes in Arabic. يعني أحياناً تجد إنه المفعول به مجرور، خبر كان مرفوع، وهكذا. So if you want to be a fluent translator, you have to improve your language skills, your language competency in both Arabic and in English. Now, once you put the structures together grammatically, you come across two types of meaning: the denotative meaning and the connotative meaning. And when we talk about the difference between denotations and connotations, to put it simply, the word عين, the first thing that comes to your mind when we say عين is العين. So العين هي العين اللي جزء من الوجه. تمام? So if I check it in the dictionary, the first thing that I would find is the eye. But I can also say وكان في فصله عينا للمدير. وكان في فصله عينا للمدير. Here عينا هيخطر على بالي بداية eye. But the real connotative meaning of عين here means spy. So the principal or the director or whatever placed this student or this worker as a spy to spy on the other employees or the other students. If I don't go beyond the word meaning, the dictionary meaning, the denotative meaning, I may not fully understand the entire sentence or the indication of that particular word. So I need to keep in mind the connotative aspect of the connotative aspect of the text. في حد بعد إشي ثواني؟ زميلتنا تعطي مثال. طالبة طلبت من الدكتورة إنه تنشر العلامات على الموديل، فحكت can you hang our marks? So yes, exactly. She used the denotative meaning of the word that she knows, and she did not think about the actual meaning of share or publish or add our marks on Moodle or grades. Looking at this sentence, you would see that رضا الناس غاية لا تدرك ورضا الله غاية لا تترك فاترك ما لا يدرك وأدرك ما لا يدرك. This is an example on how texts, sounds, structures, collocations affect the source text's meaning and therefore influence the choices I make in the translation. Now, in this sentence can be translated in a similar rhythmic way that includes rhyme, that includes the figures of speech that are used, or it can be translated plainly, adding meaning without the beauty of the structure or the sounds of the sentence. So how can I decide which translation should be used? This is what we're going to explain a little bit later. So all of this introduction is for you to establish the idea that language is not just the text you have. If you think that translation is about the first and last line in your text, then you're wrong. Because you need to go through and beyond everything that is written in the source text language and the target text, or the text, like the translation you're going to make for that particular text. And that's the only way for you to truly understand the implications of the text and so on. So what is translation? Now, translation as a term, as a field of study, translation as a process, has been given so many definitions by so many scholars. And until this day, you would find, like, every now and then a new scholar introducing a new meaning to the process of translation. Personally, I agree with this model. I agree that translation begins with understanding the meaning and then re-expressing that meaning, although the word re-express would be uncomfortable to a lot of scholars and translators. And it is difficult to truly give one definition to translation because it's a human process that is related to human production. And every text is, let's say, distinguished for its own characteristics, for its own elements. And sometimes you feel that you need to give a definition of translation to each text separately, because translating a poem is not like translating a news article. It's not like translating a children's story. It's not like translating a research paper. And the process of translation in each text may be similar in the general understanding of translation, but in the, let's say, if you zoom in on that text, you're going to think of the different strategies that you're going to use during the process. So again, how can I understand what translation is? Personally, I prefer calling it, it's a long process that depends on the text you have. And there is no 1 + 1 = 2 in translation. And I always say this to the students. You cannot think of translation as rules and then applying these rules in order to come out with results. That's not how translation works. Translation is about keeping your mind open to the potentials of the text, the culture of the text, the language of the text, the people who are going to read the text, the source text, and then do the same process of understanding regarding the target audience. It may sound like it's going to take a long time, but this duration only happens when you are a beginner. The more you translate, the more texts you read, the more you are exposed to the language, the more you are exposed to the language you translate from and into, the better you become, the faster the process becomes, the easier things become. So if you want to be a good translator, don't read theories, don't read strategies, begin translating. Expose yourself to as many texts as you can, to as many fields as you can, because the more you understand people and the language they use, the better you become as a translator, because you're working with human thought. And human thought is the most difficult thing to put in a box. It cannot be put in a box. It has to be put in space where culture, religion, understanding of history, literature, all of these things affect your understanding of the text. So who is the translator, or who's a translator? A translator is obviously a reader. If you don't read, you cannot be a translator, because you're dealing with human thought. You need to know how people think, what people imply when they say so and so. If you do not understand people's implications, you will not be able to understand the texts. You will not be able to translate them. You need to be a researcher. When someone provides you with a text to translate, and I say this to my second year students, I gave them a text to translate about cancer. And they had to do the task at home. And to my surprise, they just started translating. So my question was, have you ever read anything about cancer in Arabic? They were like, no. I was like, have you ever read anything about cancer in English? They were like, no. I was like, so how are you going to translate a text about cancer if you have zero knowledge of the topic? So they were like, oh, so I need to read about it. I was like, yes, this is what I told you in the very first lecture. You need to read about things that you don't know. You cannot translate something that you have zero knowledge about. It just wouldn't make sense. So if someone provides you with a text about a topic that you've never heard of before, that you've never read about before, go and read about it in both languages, in Arabic and in English, so that you would have some sort of basic terminology or some sort of basic understanding of this and that. And I'll give you another example that I gave to my media translation students. So I provided them with a text and they were supposed to translate it. If they had done, like, the topic was about the appointment of the deputy commissioner of the honor one. And the names were in English, or not in English. They were like, the names were foreign names. They weren't Arabic names. So my question was, do you think that this text was originally written in Arabic? So they said, obviously not, because the context was about the UN, and the UN is obviously not an Arab organization. So I was like, if you had done little research and read about the topic in English, you would have easily chosen the correct words and terms, because this piece of news was originally written in English. Instead of having to go through every word you don't know and instead of having to look for every new term, you could have easily found all of the terms in one piece of news that was published on the UN's website. So if you want to be a translator, don't think that your only tool is the dictionary. The dictionary is only a very limited tool, a very basic tool for beginners. If you are a true translator, you need to dig deeper into the entire text as a text, not in word for word in the dictionary. You need to be a linguist, not a scholar in linguistics, but by a linguist, I mean you need to be competent in English and in Arabic. Because some say, for example, خلاص, I'm not good in English, so I'll just translate from English to Arabic. Could be a wise decision, but how do you know that you have understood the English structure well? If you're not good in English, then you might not understand the entire sentence. You may not understand the implications. You may not understand the joke behind it. And I'll give you an example that I noticed today. Today we had a guest speaker, and he's a foreigner. He's not an Arab. And he was talking about translators and whether he should defend translators in general or not. So he said, I felt that I should support my home team. Now, if you do not understand the athletic implication, you wouldn't understand the sentence. What does he mean with the expression, or what he said, the home team? Basically, what he meant was that every country has its own, for example, football team, basketball team. So it is called the home team, okay? So he made it sound as though he belongs to the community of translators. And he made this analogy of translators being like a team of players for a particular sport, and that he should support them the way you cheer for a particular team. Now, if you don't know English well, you wouldn't understand the analogy that he made. So how can you translate from English into Arabic? So if you want to be a good translator, whether from English into Arabic or Arabic into English, you need to improve the language itself. We have 4 basic skills in language: speaking, listening, writing, and reading. Translation happens at a higher, more advanced level. You can't get to that level unless you improve the basic levels. And it doesn't take much time. It doesn't take a lot of effort. I always say this to my students, so you're going to hear that a lot, but I always tell my students that the human mind, subhanAllah, was created in order to receive language and to automatically understand it, store it, and then produce it. If I was born, or if I were born in China, I would be speaking Chinese. If I were born in any other country in the world, I would be speaking the language of that world. If I go live in that country for as many years as I can, I'm going to learn to speak that language, even if no one seats me and gives me lessons on so and so, because it is the human's mind's capacity to receive language, store it in the brain, and then start producing later on. Now, because Zoom has a limited time of 40 minutes, I'm going to stop the share, and then I'm going to send you another link, okay? So I'm going to end the Zoom meeting and send you another link, inshallah.